Greetings, adventurers, and welcome to Skill Tree, where we learn how to do just about everything. Now, recently, I decided it'd be useful if we started taking, like, a bunch of the skills that we've learned and put them all together in, like, one episode so they're easier to find. This way, if you're new and beginning your journey in one of these skills, you don't have to, like, weed through a bunch of my episodes to find the most basic of skills to keep you going. So, to that end, today's episode is going to be going over the glue that holds all of our leather products together. Well, no, that's a bad metaphor, because the glue that holds it all together is, you know, glue. I'm going to be going over stitching. I'm going to be going over different ways to stitch leather together. Now, there are a bunch of ways to do this, so this is by no means a super comprehensive episode for that. But we'll call this video 1 in this particular subject because it is a really big one. Video 2 to come at some point when I need extra content. And do stick around to the end because I am doing a keychain giveaway for you guys. Just a little something to tell you that, you know, I love you. I appreciate you. Thank you for watching my show. Anyways, I hope you find this video helpful, and without much further ado, let's jump right into it and level up this skill. Okay, as good as this is, I don't think it's the right beverage for me right now. Give me a second. Yes. As some of you might know, I've been traveling a lot lately, and your boy's tired. Now, sure, I could just brew a regular cup of coffee, but as you know, anything worth doing is worth overdoing. And today's sponsor, Skillshare, has a class that's not just helped me make a coffee, it's helped me make the coffee. Let me explain. In the class, From Plant to Cup, Brew an Amazing Cup of Coffee, Michael Phillips goes over absolutely everything you need to know to make your perfect cup of coffee. From the tools to use and how to grind the beans, to making your own recipes and doing little tastings for yourself to hone in exactly what you want. It takes the whole coffee making experience to admittedly ridiculous proportions, which is exactly my wheelhouse. It tastes so good though. No, if coffee isn't, you know, your cup of tea, yeah, I'm running with it. If it's not your cup of tea, no worries, because Skillshare has classes on a wide variety of topics, including illustration, graphic design, photography, entrepreneurship. And if you want to unlock your creativity and learn something new, you're in luck. The first 500 people to click the link in the description below will get 1 month free of Skillshare. At the very least, you should definitely check out this coffee one. It's so good. Although, could be better. Counterproductive, but so good. Alright, I figured it would be helpful if we start at the beginning and talk about some of the methods to, like, lay down our markings first. Basically, if you're going to be stitching, you want to make sure you're stitching in a straight line. Unless that's not the pattern you're going for. If you want some Nightmare Before Christmas patchwork going on, then I don't know, go nuts. But for the most part, you're going to want your seams to be nice and straight. One of the best tools for helping with this is a wing divider. That's this compass looking thing right here with 2 pointy ends on it. You just adjust it to how far away you want that seam to be, and then you glide it along the edge of your leather, leaving a mark behind. It's then super easy to follow that mark when you're punching your holes for your stitches. Another way to go about this is by using this edge groover here. This thing just has a little tiny blade in it and actually cuts a small groove for the lacing to lay down into. This is great to use when you're doing a stitch that kind of goes in a straight line, like doesn't cross over your seam, and allows the stitch to sit just below the surface of the leather, giving it a lot less wear and tear. So picture if you use it for like a wallet or something that's gonna be in your pocket all the time. You don't want those stitches kind of rubbing and wearing away. By it sitting in a groove, it's gonna be protected. All right, so now you have the lines in which you're gonna be laying your stitch down into. The next thing I like to do, especially if they're like things that are going to be sandwiched together, is to actually stick them together first so that everything stays true and straight. To do this, I usually use this Tanner's Bond tape. It comes in both permanent, which is this white one here, and a brown colored one, which is like a temporary non-permanent one in case you don't need it to stick forever. For our cases though, we're going to be sewing things together, so using this tape is exactly what we want. Cool, once my pieces are stuck together, now it's time to actually lay down the holes that we're going to use to sew into. To do that, I like to use stitching chisels. They look like these little forks here, and they come in a bunch of different numbered tines. The tines come in like different spaces apart in case you want like really wide stitches or very narrow stitches. Though there are a bunch of tools for doing this. There's one that looks like a little cowboy spurs. I've never actually used it, but you can lay down kind of the marks with that and then go back in with an awl and punch them all by hand. Long story short, you'll want to make holes along the line that you made. Pro tip, by the way, sometimes these things, they get stuck in the leather and they're kind of a pain to take back out. So I like to take mine and just kind of stick it into some wax here. This just helps kind of lubricate the tines and make them easier to pull out. And everything's safer when you make it easier to pull out. To use these stitching chisels, all you do is lay them down in your line and hit them with the hammer. You want to go through so that the tines just poke out the other side. Oh, and a heads up, you'll see I'm using this old like PVC cutting board to do all of my hammering on. I really like using this thing over like the rubber mats they give you. I just feel like it sticks a little bit less. It's easier to pull things out of. And because it's a little bit more stiff, it makes the holes a lot more clean. Like there's not as much push out. Now, as long as you're careful and you keep your chisel as straight as you can, you should be able to line up your holes on both sides so they fall right within the lines that you made. Okay, we'll be getting into the actual stitching technique in just a minute. I just wanted to bring up one more tool that makes just the world of difference. This thing here is called a stitching pony, and it is worth its weight in gold. There are a whole bunch of different designs you can buy. This one just has a little nut on the side that tightens it down so that it holds the piece of leather you're trying to stitch. You don't need one. Like for the first bunch of projects I made, I didn't use a stitching pony and just kind of held it in place or like put it between my legs while I worked. And it's one of those tools you don't know you need until you use it. And then like, man, I don't know how I did anything without it. It makes life so much easier. Definitely spend the money and get a stitching pony. Totally worth it. All right, there are two more things you need before you get started. The first, of course, are some needles. These aren't your standard sewing needles. The leather needles actually tend to be kind of blunt on the pointy side. If you do try to stitch with a sharp needle, it is such an exercise in futility. Like it keeps sticking into the leather rather than passing through the holes. Super pain in the ass. You definitely want to go with like actual leather needles. Finally comes the thread. You're definitely going to want some thicker stuff, and I tend to go towards wax thread myself. The wax does a few things, but the main thing it does is it adds some lubrication to the thread because it's going to be going through leather, and the leather's kind of rough. If it's not wax while you're making all those pass-throughs, it's going to start to wear away at that thread. And then, of course, for longevity, right? Like, that thread is going to be there over time, and there's going to be little micro movements, and that leather is going to act like sandpaper. Having the thread wax is just going to make it a lot more resilient. It also makes it waterproof, helps the fibers stay laying down nice and clean. If you have trouble finding wax thread, you can take regular thick thread and just run it across wax. And boom, you've got wax thread. Not all that difficult. Now, there are a few ways to actually secure your thread to the needle. The way I like to do it is by pushing the thread through the eye and then bringing it back around and stabbing the needle through the tail. Now you can just pull that tail down and the loop that forms tightens around the eye of the needle. This gives you a nice secure hold that won't let go while keeping it nice and smooth and not having some kind of knot to contend with while you're trying to stitch through the leather. All right, I think that is more than enough setup on the tools. Let's get down to some actual stitches. I'm gonna start with a single needle stitch. This is if you actually only have one needle or you don't wanna have to deal with doing two for now. It looks just like a 2-needle stitch and it's gonna be nice and strong. You basically just start at one end, passing the needle through your holes, and pulling that thread through until there's just a little tail left over. Some people like to tie a little knot on this first. I don't like how that bulkiness looks. And in general, at the end, when we loop back around, it's gonna be held in place anyways. That's how I feel about it. You do your thing. Anyways, from here, all you do is continue to snake in and out of those holes, making kind of this running stitch pattern. Now, if you really like the look of that, you can kind of leave it just like that. It won't be as strong as when we kind of complete this stitch, but you know, it has a vibe, so if that's what you're into, then I would recommend tying a knot off on either end just to make sure it stays put. But for our purposes, once we finish, we then start to continue all the way back around in the same pattern. Doing this in the reverse order actually fills in those blanks that we left the first pass. Then once you reach the end of that run, do a couple of back stitches just to make sure everything holds nice and strong. Then take your needle and fish out that first tail so that it comes up between the two pieces of leather. Then do kind of the same thing, passing your needle through one hole and up through the center so it comes between the leather as well. Then simply use your razor knife to cut as close to that edge as possible and tuck in whatever's left over between the leather with your needle. Finally, go back in with your mallet and hit all of those laces just to help them lay down nice and flat into our groove. So I have all the stitches that I made for this episode here, and like one of them's a regular saddle stitch and one of them's that running one we just did with a single needle, and I don't know which is which anymore. I think it's this one here, and I can tell you it holds just as strong as any other one of the stitches. I didn't even damage it. I didn't do anything to it. I don't know, my sad little baby strength or if it's like actually good, but I'm gonna go with it's really good. Mostly for my pride, if we're being honest. But no, that's a really good, very easy stitch to get you started. The next one though is the gold standard for stitching as far as leather is concerned. This is ye olde saddle stitch. This is the one that every leather crafter website, book, whatever I've read says is the most reliable of stitch. Mostly because as you go, each individual stitch is basically making its own little lock, so if something does break, all of the other stitches are gonna stay intact. It's not gonna like undo all the way down the line. So for this one, we're gonna thread the needle the same way, but this time we're gonna do it at both ends of our thread. And this doesn't have to be super long. In the past, I've made the mistake of being like, I have a big project, so I need as much thread as possible to actually make sure I go all the way around it. Generally, I think it's like 3 times or 2.5 times as much thread as it takes to like go from one side to the next. But that is too much thread to work with. It's a real pain in the ass to bring all that thread through, and then it's getting tangled up on things. You do not need to do that, and I'm gonna show you what to do if you run out of thread in the middle of a project. In just a little bit. For now, suffice to say, you only need a couple feet maybe of it. You will thank me for that, trust me. All right, so you're gonna start at one end of your project, sending your needle and thread through, and then pulling it even so it lands in the middle of your thread. Okay, from here, we wanna develop a pattern. So either you're gonna go from like left to right or from right to left, but you wanna do it every time. By doing it the same way every time, you're gonna make sure your pattern comes out nice and smooth. It's not gonna kind of jump around on you. So as you can see here, I'm going from right to left every single time and then going back left to right. The technique of this is to pass it through the leather, and on the other side, you form a little cross with the 2 needles. After pinching it between your thumb and forefinger, you bring it back through and then turn that cross on its side so the other needle is now facing the hole. Then you return that needle back through the hole that the other one just came through. On the other side, you take the thread and loop it over that needle before pulling it the rest of the way through and pulling it tight. So the only reason you form that little cross there and then turn it to go back through is more of an efficiency thing. If you bring it through and then you pull that one through and then you grab the other needle and you go to pull that one through, that's just like a couple of extra steps that really add up in your time while you're making a project. By just having it at the ready, you grab it, pull and turn, and then pull it back through, it's much easier. You're not dealing with like thread kicking around. This one will be hanging and it's kind of a pain to grab onto when you're trying to, even now, reposition it so it goes back in. By already holding it in your hands, I'm never actually letting go of the needle. I'm turning it, putting this one through, and now this one is in this hand still, and this one is in this hand. Then I turn it and I push it through, bring it back, turn it, push it through. Like, I'm always holding on to my needles, so I'm never hunting around for them. Again, it doesn't seem like much, but it saves you just so much time. I promise you. And on the other side of things, when you're looping your thread around that needle, that just helps ensure that each stitch gets locked in itself. Again, this makes sure that if that thread gets cut or worn away over time, all of the other threads won't be affected by that. All right, so once you've reached the end of your row of holes, you want to go ahead and stitch back just to make sure it locks itself into place, and then bring both needles off onto the same side. Then simply take your razor knife and cut them as close to the hole as possible. This gives you this really clean line and a super strong hold. Now in the past, I'd actually melt those ends, and you still can, like I might if it's on the back side of the leather and you can't really see it anyways. But in a project like this where you can see both sides of the leather, by cutting it that close, you make sure nobody else can see the ends of it. And because they're waxed and they're sharing holes with a bunch of other threads, they're not gonna pull through. If they do pull through, you can cut it back, and if you want to, you've done enough like extra stitches backwards that you can then melt it if you feel you need to. But I just haven't felt the need to lately. They've held just fine how they are. Okay, now as promised, if you've actually run out of thread length while you're sewing, here's what you do. You of course cut off your needles and leave just a little bit of thread length there so you can kind of control where they lay so you can keep it out of the way. Then you thread a new set of needles, and starting a few holes back, continue your stitching pattern going forward. After you've gone past the point where you ran out of thread, simply use your razor knife to cut back those threads as closely as possible. By starting a few holes back, you make sure that hold is nice and tight and isn't going to be going anywhere. And look at that, you could barely notice at all that you had run out of thread. By starting those few holes back, you help to reinforce where you ran out of thread, so that doesn't become a problem. That's not going to come apart. And then you're just able to continue on your way without worrying about it. And again, this is a huge lifesaver. I can't tell you how many times I had like yards of thread that I'm trying to work with. Friggin' nightmare. It is so much faster to have like maybe a few feet at the most and have that really nice control over it rather than trying to like pull everything through and stop it from getting caught on literally everything. Such a game changer when I learned that trick. Love it so much. Okay, so that is a couple of ways to keep like two surfaces together this way. But now we want to talk about how to actually butt two ends together. In this demonstration, by the way, I'm using just two flat pieces, though that doesn't often happen. I suppose if you're making like maybe a cool like leather rug or cloak or something, there'd be a reason to butt things together. But in general, this tends to happen when you're actually wrapping something with leather. I've done a lot of butt joints when I'm like wrapping my wand or something, right? Or like a little flask. That's a great time to use butt joints. Now, I'm not gonna lie to you, filming sewing is like notoriously hard. Your hand gets in the way and the camera tries to focus on it or whatever. Then you lose track of what thread I'm doing. So to try to make this easier, I'm actually using two different colored threads here that I just kind of tied together in the middle. All right, so this first one looks kind of cool and it's gonna be called like a cross stitch. Now I started this one by bringing both needles out of either side of the seam and then pulling them even, then looping that around and bringing them back through to give me a nice secure starting point. From there, I sent one needle through the next hole down and then diagonally across down one hole. Then I did the same thing with the other needle, bringing it out through its side hole, then diagonally down one hole to form this little cross here. Then just did the same thing the next hole down. In the back, you can see that I'm actually looping around to come out of the holes that the other side just came through. This ends up forming these nifty little bars here. Doing this allows me to just continue this pattern, making sure it's nice and tight while forming all these little X's. Now, while I was doing this, I realized something. Technically, this is 2 stitches. Because in my plague mask video here, I actually used the bar side of that cross stitches as the stitches going kind of down along the beak. So I realized if we actually just flip that over, we have a cool bar stitch as well. Instead of forming the cross on the front side, we just go out one hole and then back in immediately next to that one. By doing this with both needles, we're able to form these bars. And on the other side, we're just kind of crossing over just like we did in the front. Regardless which way you use to end it off, you just go in and out of the last holes a couple of times to form this nice tight bar. This gives you the ability to kind of just like hold it a little bit tighter and make sure it really kind of clamps down. Now, if you're going to be doing this while it's like around a thing, what you're going to be left with are these 2 threads that are hanging out of the bottom. Basically, all you have to do from there is tie them into a little knot, which will sink underneath the leather. Then just cut off those tails. And there you have it, 2 different stitches for the price of 1. I actually really like that. I didn't realize that those were the same stitches until I was going. I'm like, hey, I feel like I've done this before. All right, I have one more butt seam one I want to show you that's super clean. I think it's actually called the butt seam. Just like before, you're going to be passing both sides of your thread through, making sure they're nice and even. Then on either side, you pass the needle back through the hole that is directly underneath them. Then you cross in the back, bringing them back out the holes that the opposite needle just came through. Then do the same thing, just bringing them back around through the holes directly beneath them. In the back, you can see all we're doing is coming through and making another one of those little bars as we cross the needles and go back through the holes. So I guess technically this could be 2 stitches as well, because you're still getting that kind of bar thing going on. I realize though you might not be able to visualize if you're wrapping it around something, how you're like getting the stitches in through the back. Whenever you're doing this, basically all you're doing is passing through one hole and then directly out of the next one. This accomplishes the exact same thing, making that little bar in the back and bringing you back out where you need to be. The same thing goes with like whenever you're doing that cross stitch or whatever. If your aim is to come back out of the hole underneath it, you just go in and then you angle your needle around to come back out of that other hole you're aiming for. I hope that makes sense. I didn't get footage of that other one, but I think you're smart enough to wrap your head around that one. And just as before, once you're done, all you want to do is tie a knot at the bottom and then cut it off close with your razor knife. Again, once it's like wrapped around something, the thread is gonna be up in between the leather and the thing, so you're never gonna see it. And there you have it, our first set of a bunch of different stitches you can use to put your projects together. I hope this is helpful for you. I know it's super helpful for me because it's hard to film these things in the moment. So it's nice to be able to be like, I'm using a butt stitch. Check out this video here to see how you do that. See that? It's helpful for you. It's lazy for me. Cheers. But seriously, I do hope you get a lot out of these episodes. I know they're not like sexy and new, but I do want this channel to be helpful. That's kind of the biggest thing I want to get out of it. If you do like this kind of content, let me know in the description below. I'd really appreciate that. Also, you know, give me some of that like and love, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't release new content. Now, I have my fancy laser engraver, and I'm kind of in love with it. I like making stuff with it. And lately, I've been busting out a whole bunch of little skill tree keychains here. So if you're interested in winning one of these, I'm gonna be giving 10 of them away. All you gotta do is leave hashtag keychain in the comment section below. I'll pick 10 of you at random and let you know who won. Then just let me know where to send it, and I'll send it your way. All right, that's all I got here today. I hope you have fun stitching up your projects, and in the meantime, keep leveling up, you. You've made it to the end screen. YouTube loves it when you do that, and it's a fantastic way to support this channel. Another fantastic way to support this channel is by joining these people's noble ranks. These are our Patreon members, and I can't do any of this without them. Special shout out to our newest high tier Patreon members: Snoke186, Aaron Anderson, Jay Bay, Julielle Wilhelm, Kareth Flex 1, Notori Ryu Survival 01, and James Hale. Again, huge shout out to you. It is incredible that you support this channel. It means everything to us. Thank you so much. If you like what we do here and want to support us, consider joining our Patreon, link in the description below. Otherwise, you can click on one of these videos here, and that helps too. My vote is for the